I am finally doing something that I have been wanting to do for a long time and should have done a long time ago because I finished these books almost 6 months ago. I am finally doing the Discworld series review. So, hooray! Actually, the biggest reason why I've been humming and hawing over how I wanted to, over doing this review is I wasn't entirely sure how I wanted to do this review. Because, well, it's Discworld and there's a lot to talk about. So, with that said, I'm going to be going through them series by series, set by set. And I'll just go into what I liked about them, if there's anything that I didn't like about them. Spoiler alert, there's not really much, if anything, that I didn't like about any of the series, or any of the books for that matter. So this might be a little one-sided. But for the most part, I'm going to, give these books a fairly honest review. So, to start off with, we are going to talk about, or I am going to talk about, the Wizards series. Starting with The Color of Magic, which is the very first Discworld book, and ending with Unseen Academicals. The Wizards series is also known as the Rince Wind series because it focuses primarily on the character of Rince Wind, with the actual exception of Unseen Academicals. And I guess, The Last Hero, but Rince Wind is a major character in that, so I still count that as being a Rince Wind book instead of like just a general Discworld book. Discworld. So yes, let's get into that. If I'm being perfectly honest, I do think the Wizards books are probably some of the weakest of the Discworld books. And that's not to say they're bad by any definition, because they're really not. The Rince Wind books, / Wizard books, are genuinely some of the funniest books that are in this series. Instead of focusing on major issues and stuff like that, or having any sort of real point to having a point that it's trying to make, it instead focuses primarily on jokes, especially because Rince Wind himself is a substantial coward and sort of incompetent. He can't do magic, but he is kind of smart in other ways. He's able to figure things out. He's able to work things out, and he speaks several different languages. So you can't be an idiot and speak several different languages. Like, there has to be a certain level of intelligence going on there. So anyway, Rince Wind's not an idiot, but he is a major coward. So that does tend to lead to the Rince Wind books focusing primarily on characters that are not Rince Wind, and the more interesting things that are going on with them. Like, say, Rince Wind having to traverse across the Discworld with Two Flower. That is the first 2 books. And there's not really much of a plot for them. Well, I mean, The Light Fantastic does have a plot, but The Color of Magic not so much. With Sorcerer, it focuses on primarily the Sorcerer, not so much on Rince Wind. With Eric, it is Rince Wind going through time with the Discworld's major demonologist, Eric, who is a child. Yeah, it just kind of goes from there. Like, just all the Rince Wind books, they're focused primarily on being funny, on being humorous, and less so on showing any sort of having any sort of real major point other than to be funny. And that's not to say that it doesn't, because, I mean, it does have some stuff to say, like, interesting times, and you do kind of get a bit of a funny thing that does kind of have some points, I suppose, with The Last Continent, but those books really are focused primarily on just being funny. I loved the books. I genuinely loved them. And I don't have anything really bad to say, except for maybe like The Color of Magic, which I did find didn't have much in the way of a plot. It was just stuff that happened. But at the same time, I can't give it any sort of real flack because it is the book. I mean, I genuinely love the book, and it's the one that I started with, and it is the one that started my love of the Discworld. So, despite not having much of a plot, I do still love it. Next, The Witches. I'm not going to spend as much time on The Witches because, I mean, one, there's fewer books, but also I just don't have as much to say. The Witches books are fantastic. They have a bit of a firmer stance on, say, something like feminism and the role women play within society. And to be perfectly honest, I really just don't have much in the way to say in terms of negativity toward it. They're just really well written books. They're fantastic. The character of Granny Weatherwax did take some time to grow on me. I have a hard time with characters like her that have a tendency to be a little bullyish. It's like Nynaeve from the early Wheel of Time books. Granny Weatherwax just kind of came off that way for me, and it wasn't until the end of the second book, Witches Abroad, that I really started to feel like Granny Weatherwax was more than just this bully. That's the third book. I always forget Equal Rights is a part of the Witches series. So, Witches Abroad is the third of the Witches books, and yeah, like it just. So yeah, it took a little while for Granny Weatherwax to grow on me. Like by the time it got to the final Witches book, I was on board with Granny, which was great because she was a major player in the Tiffany Aching books, which I will get to like now. In terms of Discworld, Tiffany Aching is not as strong as a lot of the other series, but it's also not as weak as, say, the Wizards. It does have stuff to say in terms of girls growing up and the changes that they go through and how they can find cliques and stuff like that, and sometimes just finding friends can be exceptionally difficult for this reason. There is a lot to the Tiffany Aching series. Is it the strongest stuff of the Discworld series? No. Does it start relatively weak and get exceptionally better as it goes? Oh, hell yeah. Those last two Tiffany Aching books are some of the best of that set, and honestly some of my favorites of the series. Like, as a whole. Tiffany Aching, yeah, it was... some of those books are on the bottom of my list. Actually, I think Half Full of Sky is my lowest rating Discworld book. But, the last Tiffany Aching book is definitely in my top 10 of the Discworld books, because it was just that well written, that well done, and what a note to go out on. It was just fantastic. The Guards books. This is another one that, honestly, the first book just didn't hit me as hard as the rest of the series did. And a lot of that just kind of has to do with me not connecting with the main characters. Nobby was too Nobby for me to like. Colin was just hard to like. Vimes, who is objectively one of the best, at least in my opinion, objectively one of the best characters in fiction, was really unlikable just because he was kind of a drunk asshole. And Carrot was just really naive, and he didn't understand what was going on. He took everything very much at face value because that's how he was raised. Because he was raised by dwarves, and that's just how it was with him. And dwarves don't have much in the way of metaphor, simile, or expressions. It's kind of how it was. Once the second book came around, and you kind of got to see more of who they are, more of their character personalities, and less of them just being quirks, it got better, and Vimes got exceptionally better. Like, leaps and bounds. The Fifth Elephant is by far one of my favorite, actually it is my favorite Discworld book. I think there's several of the Guards books that are in my top 5 and my top 10 because they are just that good. Feet of Clay. Feet of Clay. It's the Guards book that tackles subjects like gender expression, slavery, what self-worth is, what constitutes as being a living being. And it's all in this funny book. Because there are jokes throughout. I mean, there's jokes throughout every Discworld book. There's not a point where a person won't be laughing. But Feet of actually most of the guards books are just that they have so much to say, and they're said in such a way that you kind of come around to what they're thinking. You kind of don't really have much of a choice because it's done in such a non-browbeating, very charming sort of way that they are honestly some of the most perfect books that I can actually say have been written. The death books. Do you want to explore concepts of mortality and existentialism? These are the books for you. And you know, it's kind of funny because most of the books that are listed as the Death series don't have Death as the main character. Mort focuses on Mort as the main character. Soul Music focuses on Imp as the main character. Hogfather focuses on Susan as the main character. And Thief of Time is mostly Susan and the other guy, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, and I feel really embarrassed for not remembering his name. But it doesn't matter. Death as a character, who is in every book with the exception of two, The Wee Free Man and Snuff, he is one of the best characters of all time, just as well as Vines, actually. But with that said, he's not really a main character, even in his own books. But he is a very major, prominent figure, and he's kind of the figure that's there to explore some of these greater ideas in a way that the mortal minds would not be able to come up with. At least not on their own. And yeah, before anybody says it in the comments, yeah, Terry Pratchett is a mortal mind and he came up with these concepts. But they're philosophical concepts and they wouldn't work to be thought of by a lot of these characters within the confines of the Discworld itself. Death as a character is able to explain these in such a way that it not only makes complete and total sense, but honestly, it just works. It's probably one of the shortest of the series in terms of the Discworld, but it's just so good. Moist von Lipwig. This is the shortest series. And it focuses on an ex-con man who is charged originally with fixing up the post office. And then he's charged with fixing up the Ankh-Morpork Bank. And then after that, he is on board with the locomotives. And while he's not entirely forced into getting into the locomotives, he is also very just interested in getting into the locomotive industry. So, Moist. I didn't like him at first. I really genuinely did not like his character for the first half of Going Postal. I thought he was just a scoundrel and a scumbag, and I did not like him, and halfway through, I started to love the character. The Moist von Lipwig trilogy is some of my favorites of the Discworld for this reason. It takes a lot to get me to like a character. And it takes very, very good writing for me to change my mind about a character. So to say that Pratchett not only got me to like a character, but got me to change my mind about a character. That's just so good. I loved it. And along with the series, there's a bunch of just individual books like Pyramids, The Truth, Monstrous Regiment, Small Gods, stuff like that. These are also just very well written. They all kind of have their own little point to say on things. Like Monstrous Regiment has a lot to do with women in the military. Small Gods is the effects of faith and religion and what it is to believe in something and not just having faith, to actually have faith and to believe in something and not just follow a religion and stuff like that. Yeah, there's not a bad one of the group. Pyramids maybe might be the weakest of them, but it's like my margin. So, like I said at the beginning of the video, there's not much in the way of negativity that I can say within these books. Except for, like, some books took me a little bit more to get into. Some characters took me some time to like them. But it doesn't take away from the initial feel or the overall feel of this series. It doesn't take me out of what is going on in these books. In fact, because I'm able to come around to them, at least at some point, I have a more appreciation for what I had previously read than when I was reading it. I love Guards, despite having had a hard time getting into the main characters. I love Equal Rights, despite being the second bottom book of my favorite Discworld books, or Discworld in general. I loved A Hatful of Sky. I thought it was hilarious, despite being the bottom of the Discworld books. There's not a Discworld book that I think is bad or poorly written. Some of them might not be Pratchett's best, but I mean, you gotta have your worst with your best. And when your worst is still a 5 out of 5, what more do I need to say? Discworld straight up, as a series, is 10 out of 10. I mean, I know I took a really long roundabout way to just say something that could have been said in like 30 seconds. But, honestly, some of this is just trying to convince people who have yet to read Discworld into reading it. By saying that there is more to these books than just silly jokes all the way through. Like, there is actual real-world aspects put into them. And they're done in such a way that it doesn't feel like you're being preached at. It doesn't feel like the characters are being all, you need to see things this way, because that's not how it goes. They actually explore both sides and show why one side is not the right way where the other side is. Like the book Jingo, for example. It shows why xenophobia is not a good thing. It shows why racism is not the best way to go. Hell, a good number of Guards books deal with the concept of racism and bigotry. And it doesn't beat you over the head with it. It actually shows you. Hell, Snuff, just in general, just how people treated the goblins. And eventually showing that they were way more than what people had initially believed. Like, I could talk Discworld all day. It's so good, and it has so much to say. Read these books if you haven't. If you have, read them again. I know I have every intention of reading them again very soon. Or at least soon enough. Because they're so good, and they're so worth the read. But anyway, that's all I got for you guys, so, you know, do the YouTube-y stuff. The commenting, and the subscribing, and the liking, and the sharing, and all that other fun stuff. And as per usual, I'll see you later.